Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit of the WoW podcast, Blue Please on CynicalBrits.com. Welcome back to the Bastion of Twilight. This is a Wipe-a-thon 3000 presentation for Valiona and Theralion, the second boss of this particular raid. As you can quite clearly see, this is on 10-man mode, and if you were disappointed by Harvest Wormbreaker, then this may be your antidote, because this is not easy at all. Indeed, as of the time of making this video, we haven't actually successfully killed it. We've gotten through all the phases, we can blatantly see how it's done, we just haven't got the execution quite right yet. As with all Wipe-a-thon 3000s, the first wipe will be at normal speed, and then I'm going to speed everything up just so that we can go through the various phases and show you a progression of wipes, and us encountering the various pitfalls that you will no doubt come across in your attempts. Right, the first thing you need to worry about is the fact that Valiona uses an ability called Blackout. What does Blackout do? Blackout is going to put a dot on a random member of the raid. You then have about 15 seconds or so to stack up. If you remove that dot, or the dot expires, it will explode. It does a huge amount of damage, and if it explodes on just one person, then it's going to kill them outright, without a shadow of a doubt. So what you're going to do is you're going to stack up right there. We stack up with the tail, we use a little marker there to make it easy, and then we either dispel the dot or we just let it tick off. I would recommend dispelling it immediately once it is actually ready to be gotten rid of, and you're standing in the right place. Speaking of standing in the right place, you're going to have to watch out for those devouring flames. Very large conal area of effect fire attack. It will kill you if you keep standing in it, and she will face sort of in a random direction before she does this, generally away from the tank, but it won't be, say, 180 degrees away from the tank. So you're just going to watch out what direction she's in, make sure you're spread out, and then just haul ass over in a direction where she is not breathing. At this point, the fight's going to enter a transition phase. There'll be a thing called Dazzling Destruction, which is all over the floor. Really nasty void zones. If you stand in them, I believe for more than 5 seconds, they'll hit you for sort of like 400,000 damage. They'll kill you. So you do have about 5 seconds to get out of them, but you do want to be very, very quick about it indeed. Once the transition happens, the other dragon will land, and so begins phase 2 of the fight. The reason for our death was Dazzling Destruction. We didn't expect it, and of course it appeared, and then we all died horribly. You saw the tank's health go from full to nothing in a nanosecond. That's because you stood in the Dazzling Destruction void zones for about 5 seconds. If you do that, that's how much time you have to get out of them. They will just kill you outright. There's no way out of it. Okay. Second attempt right here. So our blackout's fairly good. We move in there. What we are doing here, which is a mistake, is we are stacking up a little bit too much, because you'll notice that the dragon at the top is also throwing these sort of void balls at us, twilight fire or whatever, and they don't do a huge amount of damage, but they do have an area of effect, so you can avoid a lot of that raid damage by simply spreading out. Don't spread out too much, though, because chances are you'll get caught in that. You do want to be a little bit careful. You notice that most of the time it does seem to go 180 degrees away from the actual tank, but that is not consistent. There are times when that does not happen. Okay, so there's the Dazzling Destruction. We can avoid that, and there we go. There's the transition done successfully this time. Okay. The first ability you have to watch out for on Theralion is Engulfing Magic. If you attack, if you cast, or indeed if you are even healed, you do damage equivalent to that heal or attack to everyone around you. Can't be gotten rid of, so you do need to get the hell away from there. And what you'll notice right there is the second ability, which we discovered is a Meteor. That Meteor will kill you, unless you happen to be a fire mage, and as such be incredibly cheesy. It will kill you unless you stack up with the other raid members. So it's like a classic Anchorage Meteor, as opposed to the crappy Meteors that don't do what they're supposed to do. You do want to stack up for that. You'll notice that's going to kill a hunter right there because he didn't do it. So if you get that little purple arrow above your head, you need to stack up. The best thing you can do in this fight, as we discovered, is to attempt to sort of stay behind the boss at all times. Now, use the little marker as an indicator and consistently move, because you're going to keep getting these nasty void zones all over the place, and then things start to get even more interesting. You'll have noticed a massive, great deep breath across the room there. That deep breath can hit one of 3 areas in the room. That particular time, we got it in the middle of the room, and you do have to keep an eye on Valiona, because she will sort of angle herself at a particular part of the room, and that's the only indication that you get. There might be mods later on that'll tell you which side, but, well, that's hacks, so there you go. Okay, so we've done the transition now, and we are back in phase 1, and that's really what the fight does, but there are a number of different things that you still have to watch out for, because we did continue to wipe in this fight. Now, the health bars in this fight are shared, as you can probably tell. So you can do damage to either, and you will continue to do damage to both. 32 million HP is what you've got to take down. You have 10 minutes to do it, and if you don't do it in 10 minutes, there's a hard enrage that will kill you. The cause of our wipe in this case was a combination of a bad blackout, and one of our healers ended up getting caught in the flame, and also then got hit by a fireball from the sky. The combination of those knocked out the healer, which meant the tank didn't get the heals he needed, which then collapsed the raid, and there's the wipe. As you can see, we are having a few problems with positioning in our early attempts. We do get better as we go along. We're still getting hit too many times by those fireballs from the sky. There is just no reason at all, aside from the moving in to avoid the blackouts, that multiple people would be hit by those. Again, they don't do a lot of damage, but why put the unnecessary strain on the healer? That's the point. Okay, move over the blackout there, very nice. And it's also good to have that nice little green healing circle there placed by the druids, and that allows us to absorb some of that incoming damage and heal it up without any effort from the healers. Now, something that should be mentioned about this dazzling destruction. So, these void zones are kind of weird. They're not your normal void zones. So, what happens is, if you stand in them for too long, you'll actually get teleported to the Twilight Realm, and bad things happen there. If you stand in them even longer than that, you'll notice the big fireball that came down at the center of them. That will kill you instantly. That's the mechanic that kills you, not the actual void zone. If you stand in the Dazzling Destruction for too long, you'll end up in the Twilight Realm, and what will happen in the Twilight Realm, which I will show you at some point, I believe I do end up there at some point, which is nice because that will allow you to see exactly what's happening. You will have to dodge a bunch of crystals on the floor, and if you hit too many of them, you will die. You need to find a portal to get back out and actually re-engage the boss. Okay, anyway, we're back on Theralion, that's phase 2, so we're moving together quite nicely here, not having too many problems. We did end up failing on a meteor earlier, so that is something you do need to avoid. Bit of engulfing magic right there. Again, with engulfing magic, you can move away. It doesn't do damage to you, it only seems to do damage to the raid. So as long as you move away from the raid, you can continue casting as far as I can tell. Now, this bit is where it gets really unpleasant, because once you've got that deep breath, it's very, very important that you move correctly. Look at the amount of void zones and crap that's going all over the goddamn floor. Can't stand in that. Very dangerous indeed. This fight is extremely intense with the amount of things you have to deal with. Okay, transition phase, back to phase 1. And that's a wipe, because our main tank is dead during the transition phase. What happened? Well, simply, it's actually the DPS's fault right here, myself included. We took too much raid damage, we put too much strain on the healers. Some of the healers ended up going out of mana, and they couldn't keep the tank up. So, tank dies, bleh, game over. That is something that DPS and indeed the entire raid do really need to watch out for in this particular fight, particularly phase 2. The movement requirement is fairly extreme. A quick recommendation to any class, of course, including Mage, that has a talent which allows you to cast something while moving. I would recommend that you take it for this fight. I end up swapping out later on and actually changing my fire spec to something that's a bit more suitable for this fight. I took Impact out, which I was using, of course, on the Trash, and was being used in Fight 1, that being Harvest Wormbreaker, and replaced it with the Free Scorch and the Moving Scorch talents, which did help my DPS quite significantly during Phase 2. It's nice during Phase 1 as well, but there's a lot more movement in Phase 2 required, so it is really tasty. Also, it might help you with your mana problems a little bit. This is quite a long fight, so if you're using Molten Armor, the likelihood is you may have to switch at some point to Mage Armor. I think that's how it's actually designed now. In the middle of a fight, you are supposed to switch armors, kind of like you would switch aspects or stances, I guess. But hey, there you go. Right, Phase 2 transition once again. We're getting a bit better at the meteors now, i.e. we're not eating them horribly. Do want to watch out for those void zones on the floor still, though. They're going to hit you like a truck. And if I remember correctly, they can also teleport you to the Twilight Realm. I think in this particular wipe, that actually happens, so I can show you exactly what happens there. Failure at the back there with the meteor. Do need to move in an awful lot, and watch out for that engulfing magic. Unnecessary damage taken there. I end up failing on a meteor as well, so I'm certainly not blameless here. Moving in right there. Okay, so that's a nice take on the meteor, no problem at all. Watch out for those void zones. It's incredibly bad placement sometimes. You really got to be very careful indeed. Now, we thought that this actually did damage to us as well, but as it turns out, it actually doesn't, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Saved myself from the deep breath just there. That was a complete failure of movement by me, something you definitely want to watch out for. The thing about the deep breaths is that you're often looking at the boss that's on the ground, and actually that's not what you want to be looking at. Now, I got teleported to the Twilight Realm right there, and I believe that was because I stood in the Void Zones for too long. You'll notice these crystals all over the place. They can't be targeted, but they are going to kill you horribly if you run into them. So if you get teleported to the Twilight Realm, find the nearest portal, get the hell out of there. I do believe it's also part of some kind of achievement, but I don't know the exact details about that one. While it might look a little strict, the actual DPS requirements of this fight are not really all that high, and there is, as far as I can tell, no real benefit to timing your Bloodlust at some point later on. There is no Enrage or anything like that at a low % of health. The only Enrage is the hard Enrage at the 10-minute mark, and if you get to that, then you're boned anyway. The best thing you can do, as far as I'm concerned, is use your Bloodlust / Time Warp in Phase 1, because that's the phase you're going to be moving in the least, so you can optimize your DPS right there. Using it in Phase 2 is not particularly smart, simply because of the amount of movement you have to do. It's not going to help you too much. Right, okay, Dazzling Destruction out of that. We're not too worried about that one this time. We've pretty much mastered the art of not standing in that. There we go, much better. I'm still not using that Scorch talent. I do get it later on, and it is certainly something I would recommend. Pushing our way in right here. Watch out for that engulfing magic. You'll see someone there did not notice, and healers are going to have to watch out for this particularly, because it actually counts for your heals over time as well. That can be unbelievably lethal. Shadow Priests are going to have a problem with it as well, as are Warlocks, because damage over time effects also triggers it. So if you are in the group, and then suddenly you get landed with engulfing magic, you might end up damaging the raid as you run away from it. We actually had some kind of debate as to whether or not Shadow Priests and things should stay a little bit away from the group just in case they get engulfing magic. It really does depend on just how confident your Warlocks and, of course, your heals over time and your Shadow Priests are about getting the hell out of there. Indeed, Fire Mages are going to have a few problems with it as well, because if they've got a big Ignite and a Combustion rolling on it, then they could run into a wide variety of problems with that, and they could do a lot of damage to the raid. Those deep breaths are unpleasant. You really have to watch out. Usually the best way that I've found to deal with it is to have someone dedicated to watching which direction it's going to come from and then call it out on vent. If you recall the encounter in Ulduar Thorim, if you remember the gauntlet in that, then this is a more complicated version of that, because there's 3 places it could be instead of 2, and unlike the gauntlet, it is not immediately obvious. You're focusing on the boss, but actually you need to be looking at the other one who is off screen as well. So find someone who has a job where they're not, say, looking up the dragon's arse and is easily able to keep an eye on it and then just call it on vent. Then everyone can move out of the way and you're not going to die to it. That's it. We did lose someone to that breath early on, which is not helping the DPS at all. So we're down to 5 DPS right here. We're still doing fairly well, but it could be a lot better. Again, bear in mind that the longer this fight goes on, the more strain there's going to be on the healers, because there's all of this raid damage all over the place. It can be a big problem. We lost the DPS there to the Void Zones, and by this point, of course, we're in a lot of trouble. Ho-Ho is one of our best DPS. You may know him from such forums as shadowpriest.com. He is exceptional at what he does, but everybody makes mistakes. And considering the amount of stuff that's going on in this fight, I don't really blame him. He ended up getting hit by the large ball of Twilight Death that landed in the middle of the Void Zone, and of course, we then all get slaughtered horribly. That's pretty much it, folks, honestly. That is how you do that particular fight, or more accurately, how you don't do it. That should hopefully give you an idea of what you need to avoid. It's all about execution in that fight. You can't screw up, especially in a 10-man. I think this is going to hit a 10-man a lot harder than it will a 25, because losing 1 DPS here could result in you not reaching the enraged timer, whereas if you lose a DPS in the 25-man mode, it might not be such a big deal. Regardless, it is a tricky fight, it is a very enjoyable fight, there's a lot of things to learn here. It certainly bodes well for the future of Cataclysm raiding, if other fights are like this or better. It's certainly a lot better than the first boss that we encountered in this particular area, and I'll bring you a kill video of Theralion and Valiona once we actually have one. A hard fight is hard, oh so very delicious. My name's been TotalBiscuit, and I'll see you next time.